What are the elements of involuntary manslaughter in the state of New Mexico? What does a prosecutor need to prove in order to get a conviction? What role does law enforcement play? I'm going to answer those questions right now. What's up, everybody? My name is Eric Scramlin. I'm a former prosecutor here in the state of New Mexico and the current owner of Tactical Legal Solutions, LLC, where I provide legal education courses to prosecutors and law enforcement. Before I get started, if you're into these kind of videos, if you're law enforcement, if you're an attorney, if you're just a member of the public that likes to be educated on the law, please consider hitting that subscribe button down there so you will be notified whenever I come out with a new video. So let's get down to the brass tacks, as they say. I was listening to the news today, and apparently somebody got charged with involuntary manslaughter in New Mexico today. I was listening to the news, and I've heard a lot of talk about what it is and why a prosecutor would charge it and what they have to prove. So I figured I'd take a minute for my viewers on this channel and for the listeners of the podcast. What is involuntary manslaughter? What does a prosecutor need to prove, specifically under New Mexico law? As a former prosecutor in New Mexico myself, I have charged this crime. I have prosecuted this crime. I've prosecuted first-degree murder cases in which this was asked for as a lesser-included offense. So what does it mean? What does a prosecutor need to prove? Why would someone get charged with it? In order to really understand what the charge of involuntary manslaughter is, you have to understand how criminal statutes are written, what the guts are. So when we look at almost any criminal statute, they're almost always made up of two distinct elements. One is the criminal act, the thing that they do that the law prohibits. And along with that, we have a mindset, the guilty mind. We call the act, the actus reus, and the guilty mindset, the mens rea. So almost every criminal statute is going to have those two elements in it. Homicide statutes are no different. So in New Mexico, we have essentially four different versions of homicide. At the very top of the list, the worst thing you can do is first-degree willful and deliberate murder. That is going to be a specific intent crime. And before I kind of go any deeper, let me explain what that means. Most crimes are going to have three different types of mindset and a little bit of a hybrid, as I'm going to talk about with manslaughter. Either it's specific intent, it's general intent, or it's strict liability. So when we talk about a specific intent crime, the statute will say something to the effect of they did the act with the specific intent to accomplish X. First-degree murder is an example of that. In order to be convicted of first-degree murder, a defendant must act willful and deliberately. They must plan it. They must weigh the consequences. They must have premeditation. Essentially, to boil it down, they're doing it on purpose. They've thought about it. They want this to happen. They want to kill this person. They take the act that does it. That's first-degree murder. That's the highest, the worst one we have that's punished the most. When we go down at the very bottom of the list, we have two versions of manslaughter, voluntary and involuntary. Voluntary manslaughter being they acted intentionally, but they had sufficient provocation. The classic example they gave us in law school would be, a man comes home early from work, sees someone in bed with his wife, and sees red and just snaps and kills the person. They were provoked. The scene red kind of murder. Involuntary manslaughter is a notch below that at the very bottom of the list. It only requires, and this is where New Mexico may be a little different than other states, it doesn't have a specific intent element, and it's not general intent, but it requires a mindset of criminal negligence. So what does criminal negligence mean? The New Mexico Supreme Court gave us a good definition of what criminal negligence means in State versus Henley. In State versus Henley, the court said an involuntary manslaughter jury instruction is proper only when the evidence presented at trial permits the jury to find the defendant had a mental state of criminal negligence when engaging in the act causing the victim's death. Further on from that, in State versus Skippings, another New Mexico Supreme Court case, they kind of broke that down even further. In State versus Skippings, the New Mexico Supreme Court stated that there was evidence to support the view that the defendant engaged in the dispute and behaved in a fashion that exposed the victim to danger without intending the victim's death. Defendant was entitled to an involuntary manslaughter instruction. Another aspect of involuntary manslaughter is there cannot be any evidence that the defendant intended to kill the person. It has to be this negligent act, this criminal negligence, as the court has stated. One thing that I always recommend to my officers when I'm teaching a course, not just in New Mexico, but in any state, is to be familiar with your state's jury instructions. Most every state's going to have some sort of standard form. In New Mexico is no different. We have a standard jury instruction for most criminal offenses. So if you look at the jury instruction for involuntary manslaughter, it's going to be 14-231, and it lists the elements that a prosecutor must prove to the jury. This is what a jury is going to get in the trial. So if you look at 14-231, this is what it reads. Number 1, name of defendant, whoever that may be, and then you describe the act that they did. Number 2, name of defendant should have known the danger involved in whatever the actions were that they did. Number 3, defendant acted with willful disregard for the safety of others. Number 4, the defendant's act caused the death of the victim. And then finally, in every case, to establish criminal jurisdiction, it happened in New Mexico on or about, and then you list the date when the act took place. As in any case, I always say go to the jury instructions. Use that as your guide. The statutes, get rid of the statute book. You can get these jury instructions off New Mexico One Source. I'm going to leave a link in the description below, and I'm going to be doing a video for my New Mexico officers and other officers out there about how you can use these jury instructions to figure out what the proper crime is. You can also use it as a guide in your investigation, because this is literally what's going to be read to the jury, and this is what we're going to have to prove. So use that to guide your investigation. If you're investigating involuntary manslaughter, you're going to want to look for those facts, either direct evidence or, in most of my cases, circumstantial evidence. So that could be anything from the statements they make to eyewitness testimony to their behavior before, after, during the incident. All those things can be indicative of what their mindset was when they committed the act. So I hope that sheds a little bit more light on what involuntary manslaughter is. And once again, if you enjoy this type of video, make sure you hit the subscribe button down there. I got a ton of videos about the law, not just New Mexico law, but national law here on the channel, and I got a lot more coming. If you're interested in checking out some of my courses, you can find that information on my website at tacticalattorney.com. Thanks again for stopping by, guys. I'll see you on the next episode.